says, Jason is a father, a combat veteran, a community volunteer, and an atheist. Jason has been a community volunteer and member of Iowa Atheists and Freethinkers for more than a decade. He has served on the board of multiple nonprofits that provide cultural, economic, and educational enrichment for community members of all ages. He supports religious freedom and has spoken at many venues about the importance of mutual respect between people of different worldviews and backgrounds. So, thank you, Jason.
So, thank you very much for that, and that's a pretty good overview of myself. Some of the other organizations I've been mainly a part of is another group called Hispanic Educational Resources. We run a daycare for Hispanic, mainly Spanish-speaking children, like 80% low-income families, right by the capital of Illinois. Very proud of that work as well. Because without early childhood education, most people can't work, right? So that's very important. So thank you for that. So this is it is just a glorified PowerPoint presentation, and in a better world where we have tons of time, it would be a workshop and we'd have a ton of interaction. But I find as the atheist guy, I spend a lot of time explaining what atheism is first. So the first half of this presentation is all about what atheism is and a little bit about what it is not. And then we can move into how we can use secularism and atheism to make a better culture in society. So we'll get started. The first question, do you believe in a personal God? God that answers prayers, that intervenes in people's lives, cares what you do, what you think, how you see, who you sleep with, what you eat, etc. If your answer to this question is no, then you're an atheist, right? But it's not just no. Atheism is A, meaning not. Theism is a belief in that God that I just described. If your answer is anything other than yes, then you are an atheist in regard to that God. I don't know is a yes. So when someone says they're spiritual but not religious, I think we can all understand and respect that. That doesn't mean they're making a positive claim about the belief in God. That's technically an atheist position, unless they explain more. That's a good starting point when we talk about different things. Here's an example. Who here believes in unicorns? Okay. If you don't believe in a unicorn that you can go out and ride, pet, sit on, take a picture of, then I'm assuming you're an unicornist, right? That doesn't mean you think about unicorns every day and how mad you are at unicorns or how certain unicorns are better than others. It's just not a part of your life. It's interesting. It might be useful to explain something else. It's not real, right? I'm also, if anything, if you have any questions on the slides, let me know. I'm going to try my best not to read my slides because we get a minute of that at school. But I can clarify. So why not believe in God? There's a whole bunch of reasons, right? Evidence is probably the biggest one you're going to see out there from a lot of people like myself who take it seriously and really think about it. But I consider it logically impossible for a lot of the traits that we apply to a God. They can't exist together. They're the philosophical arguments, they do tend to fall short. Ethics, this is a big one. Introducing gods does actually complicate ethics sometimes. If your reliance on what is right or wrong is on your subjective view of unicorns or gods, that's conflict right there, right? And then human progress. A lot of times we see things that would otherwise be harmless or useful are running counter to some traditional views that are religious nature that can stifle progress sometimes. So, with that being said, nothing I've said about atheism is telling you to do anything, right? It's not a political position. It's not something where I'm on team atheism or something like that. It's just a conclusion. It is not an ideology. Atheism doesn't tell you to do new things. It's a result of thinking about things. And that's why I really like this slide. Who here can name somebody on this slide?
I believe that's Pat Tillman on the lower left.
Absolutely, Pat Tillman. Do you know who he is? Do you know who
Yeah, he's a football player that was killed by friendly fire in Afghanistan.
That's right. Yeah. Did everybody hear that? Yeah, he was killed in friendly fire. And the reason he's up here is because he quit a lucrative NFL career. And he was in the NFL. Or I think either he was going to be. And he's like, no, I'm going to go and serve my country, because I think that's important. And he was an outspoken critic of a lot of the political views of at that time, the George W. Bush administration. And he was unfortunately killed in friendly fire. But what makes him unique is that a lot of folks used his death to further their political agenda without even regarding what he actually believed. And he wasn't atheist, he was an outspoken atheist. It was actually unpopular for saying that. But nobody else recognizes anybody else.
I think that's Ayn Rand.
That is Ayn Rand. She She is the writer, the objectives writer who wrote books like Atlas Shrugged, Fountainhead, very conservative libertarian type of viewpoint. How many here would associate atheism with conservative libertarians? Not many people would, but all the people up here are atheists. In the upper left, that's Dr. Hector Avalos. He was an Iowa State professor. Right there. He wrote many books, gave many lectures, helped found this organization I'm a part of. He passed away a few years ago, unfortunately, from cancer. Big atheist there. He spoke all the original languages, kind of a hero of mine. That's Butterfly McQueen. She was an actress back when it was kind of dangerous to not only be black, not only be a woman, but be a black woman atheist in the 50s, I guess. But that was her. She was an outspoken atheist. Below her is Dan Parker. He's the president of Freedom from Religion Foundation. And then we have somebody who I was hoping you guys would know. Who here has heard of Cat's Cradle? Slaughterhouse 5. That's Kurt Vonnegut. He's a big atheist. He has ties to Iowa. He actually attended the Iowa Writers Workshop here. He was very critical of religion. And he was kind of critical of everything, So if you've read any of Kurt Vonnegut, he's a funny guy. But the point of this is to show that atheism doesn't mean you're going to be some secularist, left-wing, all that comes with it. It is right being atheist too, because it's a conclusion based on evidence or arguments for many people. Or sometimes they just don't know about the religion you might be talking about. I think it's an atheist, right? So what about those spiritual but not religious folks? We're the agnostics, right? So agnosticism is about knowledge. Theism is about belief. Weird things you can believe in something that you can't know about.
A lot of.
Give me an example.
Well, I think that a lot of religious beliefs are based on not knowable traits, right? That I'm going to believe in God even though I don't know that there is a heaven, or that there. And in theory, I guess I haven't thought a lot about it to put an argument together, but that it's. I mean, you play around with definitions of, well, this is my belief versus my knowledge. I think that's tied up in the nature of belief.
So like faith. I mean, I
Yes.
don't know where you're going, but that sounds to me like because you have faith.
But yes, by definition, faith is a different process.
Good.
I believe that when I turn on the light switch, the lights are going to come on, but I don't remember how that works. They taught me in elementary school.
Like how electricity works.
Right, like how electricity works.
But here's a question for both of you. Do you think it's possible to know how that works?
Yes.
Do you think it's possible to know God exists?
I think it's possible to know that God exists. Yes.
So someone who disagrees says, I don't think it's even possible to know. That's where your agnostics go, right? That's an agnostic atheist. Say, not only do I not believe in it, I don't know, and I don't think it's even possible to know. So I'm going to be an agnostic on that, right? Like, do you know what's in my right pocket right now? You don't know. You have ideas. You don't know. So you're an agnostic as far as what's in your pocket. Agnosticism for most people is a subset of atheism. A lot of times in our society, agnosticism is like an alternative, like a more reasonable sounding alternative, saying you don't know. That is reasonable to say you don't know. It's an atheistic position because I don't know. It's not a yes, right? So agnostic atheist is how I would describe myself. Gnostic theist is usually what religious folks are, because they believe in God, but they also think it's possible to know God, which for sure we're Christian or something like that. Or atheists, but you think that was my knowledge, was my belief. Any questions on this particular side? Because this one sure is going to pull. So, like analogies, usually sports analogies, when I have older audiences, they don't work out so well. Here it might actually work. We'll use the hats today. So refusing to pick a hat doesn't mean you dislike all hats, right? Not picking a hat is an immoral choice. We aren't born with hats. They're usually given to us, right? And we shouldn't force others to wear a hat if they don't want to wear it, right? So we can think of all these different hats that people wear, put on different aspects of their personalities, different things they like to do. Religion for many people is a hat. Atheists and agnostics just don't wear a hat. Some of them never picked it up. wasn't part of the life. Some of them had a bad time with that, right? Sometimes they illustrate different ones on until they find the one that fits. But the important part about this is you shouldn't force other people to wear a hat. You shouldn't give special privilege to those who choose one over another. And you certainly shouldn't penalize people who don't want to wear it. What are some strengths of faith? Anything?
For a lot of people, it's a motivator to do good, to kind of stay on what they consider to be the right path, to do good things and to help other people because they have this belief in some being who cares that you're doing good.
I think you need faith to do things.
What can do?
It can be a motivator, an ethical or moral motivation or a bad luck. Any other strengths of faith? That's one. Any other strengths?
To build community.
Community building. Any other strengths? Go ahead.
Trust the lights of God.
We'll come to that. Anybody have?
There are things that don't make sense, and I think a lot of faith is trying to answer questions and order the world that is disordered.
To make sense of things that may not be, what's the word I'm looking for? I can't think of it now.
The purpose of life. Why are we here?
There you go, like some philosophical
Order and philosophical understanding.
So we have community building, ethical, ethics, and moral foundations, and philosophy. What is the strengths of science?
Trust the lights of God.
It's provable with numbers and vision, like it's, empirical thing.
Empirical. Okay, that's good. That's a good word to use. Yeah. Anybody have any other strengths of science? Oh, I have some ideas here too. When solving a problem, which one works best and how? You don't have to answer that. What do you think about some of these things? So this just shows the juxtaposition between faith and science as the atheist sees it, and if you see anything you disagree with or want to work on, please speak out. So faith is generally assertions without evidence. That's usually what makes it faith for atheists. Science relies on evidence and seeking it out. Faith is untestable outside of here. Science is testable and self-proving. Subjected to the personal, geographic, and political environment. How many Hindus do we have here today? Any Muslims? Sikhs? Zoroastrians? Pastafarians? Jedi? Christians? LDS? Oh, okay. Yes, they say how it can be geographically based. Methodological and contain into account subjective claims. So we can explain the disparate faiths. Why there's no Sikhs, Jedi, Hindu here is because of geopolitics, community, social sociology, right? That's science. Faith generally cannot be challenged. And what I mean by this doesn't mean that you're not going to have your faith challenged. It's if you make a faith thing to me, I really can't bring anything to bear. Because I don't, what am I going to say? You're lying? That's all I got, right? That's not really a challenge. Whereas science, it encourages the inquiry. You kind of have to prove it with some kind of understanding. You have to know how light turns on. You really have to start wiring up a room for light. You can't just say you're going to do it, right? Faith can stop inquiry to an idea. Who's familiar with stem cell research? Knows what that is? You don't want to know the actual genetics of it. But I mean, this is a field that has had success outside of the United States in treating cancers, regrowing organs, and things like that. But often it did use some, what many consider to be unsavory methods using fetal tissues and things like that. So, 20 years ago or so, it was banned or really curtailed. And that left the United States behind other countries that didn't ban it. And the reasons they were banned were purely faith-based because of opposition to things like abortion and miscarriages. We can agree or disagree on those things, but the science was slowed down because of that. Science, on the other hand, is responsible for many improvements in healthcare, communication, energy, etc. Faith is the last one. Faith, the atheist would contend, doesn't work in any measurable way. Who agrees with that?
What do you mean by work?
Does it do what it says it's going to do? It's a hard question.
I mean, there are like sociological and psychological studies that show that people who are within faith communities receive a lot of psychological and sociological benefits. I would imagine that you argue that that's from the community, not from the religious community itself.
I wouldn't argue that. I would say what does the science say is. Right? And that's how I would respond to that. Because I'm not going to argue that you don't get benefit from your faith. I don't know what's in your head, right? But I can measure a group that has cohesion, and I can measure a group that has none, and see that one of the cohesion community tends to do that. Now, they might be rallying around a church. They might be rallying around something like a religion. But they're still happy, right? So that's measurable. But that is a scientific claim, not a faith. Even faith is measured, or the results of their faith. So this just shows that science works. Very advanced science.
I would maybe counter to say this. It is extremely difficult to measure.
Faith.
Right, faith. Yeah, you're relying on some study of people in the hospital, people who pray and get healed. You know, the prayer effect of faithful people praying in a hospital to get better versus people who have no belief and do not pray. You're asking to, trying to quantify that, trying to gather that data in a meaningful way. I think anybody, once they're questioned about it, they're going to start to say, even by questioning it, it's going, as a researcher, how do you gather that information? How do you, so that's, I think it's more, well, anyway, I would say that it's more about being impossible to measure than it is that it not necessarily working. But
what if I told you there's a study that did just that?
I'd love to see the study. I think it's a big challenge. I'm really.
There is one. It's old now, so I hesitate to lead with it because it's from like 2012, right?
Yeah.
I always feel like that was just a few years ago, but it's like 30 years ago. But it was put on by the Simpson Foundation, which is a religious organization, and they did it for a control group.
Sure.
This group, no prayer. We're going to measure you all. You're in the it was my hospital stays and their outcomes. Control group, no prayer, whatever. And then they had the other group that was split into two. One was prayed for, and they had their group pray for them, but they didn't tell them. And then they had the other group that they prayed for, but they didn't tell them.
Yeah.
And you know what the result of the study was? Who had better results after the prayer?
People that were told.
Generally no difference?
Generally, no difference. Slightly less outcomes for those that knew they were getting prayed for and were prayed for. They had slightly, but not statistically significant, worse outcomes. So essentially, no change, which tells the atheist. But there's a slide after that.
Why are these treated as like independent, completely separate things and not like something that can be intertwined together?
Because I'm doing a recitation to make 2 less questions. But you're right. Seeing the buildings, clean water, they're not prayed for. They're not in the cool text. They're from people doing science, coming together, checking the results, building upon each other, changing their understanding of the world. That's where science, I think, begins out. So why even do all this? Right? Why even come out and talk to people about being atheists? How exciting is it to talk about what you don't believe in, right? It's because of stuff like this. That's why. When faith was in charge, this is the kind of stuff people have to, right? And I don't think anybody here is going to defend burning witches. Obviously not, because you're better people than that. But at one point, people weren't. This was somewhat common. And this is just the American version, right? Think about the Crusades and all the horrible things you've read about in the history books. This is why. There's more to this as well that we'll go into the next slide. But because if we're going to have democracy and pluralistic society, we need to recognize that that's a problem and a potential outcome if we let things go too far in a certain direction. That's what's going on. So, secularism matters. The only way to really have freedom of religion is to also have freedom from religion. If you're required to wear a hat, then are you really one of those that choose to wear the hat, right? To use that analogy. These are examples of church, unfortunately, was a church-based leadership, undemocratic behavior. The whole recognize this, right? You folks recognize this, desegregating schools. Some sects of Baptist church were specifically founded as well because they didn't want this to happen. That's how much they care about their faith. We see the attacks on the LGBT community. They're exclusively religious, unfortunately. Protesting, even the January 6th insurrection was explicitly a religious event. Even then, no Islam, no Muslim fundamentalists, nobody's going to be blowing themselves up to attack evil. They're still going to do bad things. But the reason this happens the way it did, from the way it did, now, was faith-based. So with all these, we want to build a wall, right? We want to build a wall between church and state. Because it keeps stuff like that separate. Where we can say, these are bad ideas. We're going to not do those so much. But we're going to keep the good stuff. Who knows what these are? Do you guys know? Matthew Shepard, he was killed because he was gay. And the Pulse nightclub shooting was targeted, but the Pulse nightclub was targeted because they were gay. These seem like extreme examples. They're real. These are people, not just atheism. That's why I do what I do. Because if you can change a little few minds to think about things and have a dialogue, stuff like this becomes impossible. If you see each other as human beings. Who knows who Christopher Hitchens was? I mean, ask that. Okay,
I know.
You know who knows who you is.
Religion is our first. That's why I'm so fascinated with it. It's our first version of the truth. It's our first attempt as a species. It's what we tried when we didn't know anything. We didn't know we lived on a spherical planet. We didn't know that our planet revolved around the sun. We didn't know that there were microorganisms that explained disease. We thought diseases came from curses or witches or ill-wishing or devils or dust devils. We didn't know anything from the childish, terrified, ignorant origins of our animal primate species we've come to religion. It's also our first attempt at philosophy, our first attempt.
So, yes, that's his monologue, but I think it's a powerful statement. It's not saying that all religion is bad. That's not what he's saying. He's saying, the analogy I like to use when we talk about Hitchens, who he was a prolific author, journalist, big atheist, big pants guy, is religion is like the house that we kind of grew up in, right? And then we kind of lived in the basement because we're looking to go out. There's things out there that we might be able to do better without religion. And just like we want our kids to move out of our basement, that's what folks like Hitchens want us to kind of do. Doesn't mean we want to burn down the house, right? Doesn't mean we want to tear it down. Just maybe we don't have to live in there all the time. Okay? So that's really where we're coming from when it comes to atheism and why it's important. Atheism is simply not answering yes, do you believe in a personal God or not? It's not an ideology, it's a conclusion. And atheists seek common ground with other people via rational and testable means, and the scientific method, to learn about the world. Believing in just one lot less God than you. That's it. That's all it is. So, let's talk about fairness. Let's talk about liberty. This is where we're going to talk a little bit more about where atheism and secularism can help us. The best way is to have, we're going to run a game, is to have refs that look like this, right? We have the Kansas City Chiefs fans. Oh, maybe a little bit more.
No, but
Because this is what we don't want, right? We don't want refs that are playing for one of the teams, okay? This I think might be one of the defensive flags. The idea is that if the government is secular, then it's going to be de facto more fair than when it's based on faith. Which is logically that has to be the case. So let's do a little bit of a thought experiment. Who's familiar with the veil of ignorance? Who's heard of this term? All right, 2 people. Oh, you have this one. Awesome. So for those who don't know, the veil of ignorance is a thought experiment by philosopher John Rawls. The idea is you're going to make a new society. You're going to create it out of whole cloth, but you don't know where you're going to be in this society. You're going to create it, and then you're going to, just like a game of like Civilization or something, we're going to drop you into that society? Would you want a society that has one dominant ethnic group? If you get picked and you get dropped in and you're in the smaller ethnic group, would you want large wealth inequality? So you might, roll the dice, you might be super poor. How about one where you'd be free to express yourself, or one where you're locked into a mandatory belief system, right? A system of law that's derived from faith claims, so one faith claim is equal to another? Or would you pick one that was more equal, right? Who here has thought about this? What kind of things did you come up with?
Generally equal across all, so that you have a pretty high chance of being anywhere good outcomes.
Yeah? Anybody else have a similar thought? Would the rules that you set out for the society be subject to change? Think about that. Would the rules that you set out in the society that you're creating be subject to change? How would you find out what's good about it, right? So, what do you do with a secular government, one that is not based on faith? Is it lets us bridge the ideas from yesterday to today? Would you use stone tablets, natural disasters, or prophets to lay down your law? Or would your conception of the good have to change as you discover more about the world? Many folks thought that, for example, Black people, and still do in some places, have a higher tolerance for pain. So then they would administer less anesthetic to folks, people of color. A lot of the modern birthing methods, and birth control methods, were tested out on, Black women without anesthetic, not because they wanted to hurt Black women, but because they thought it wasn't hurting. So we know that's not true. We're all human beings. So their concept of the good had to change if they were going to be consistently treating their patients with respect and care. And that brings us to making peace, right? Because there's a lot of things that we've talked about here that are old, right? Stone tablets, prophets, different faith claims. And there's my family. We like to celebrate Christmas. We don't believe in Jesus, right? Halloween is a lot of fun. Those are really all early holidays, right? Who doesn't like candy? Who doesn't like to dress up? Just for fun. Actually, does anybody not like Halloween? I don't either.
Loves it.
And then Easter, right? Who thinks Jesus rising from the dead has anything to do with this picture? Yeah, you look at Target, what do you see? There's nothing like that. So, the first people who didn't like Christmas were Christians. They actually wanted to outlaw it in colonies because they thought it took away from observing the divinity of Jesus, and it took away from what they should be doing, which is studying their Bible and honoring God. It was the Christians who did it on Christmas. That being Samhain is actually where Halloween came from. It's a Celtic ritual where you have people dancing around without their clothes on, and spirits going and coming at you and stuff like that. That's the origins of Halloween for America. And then there's Yostra, which is the goddess of fertility, spring. Many cultures actually have, of all the holidays here, Easter is one that all cultures can have because all cultures experience spring, usually, right? We can have modern interpretations of faith-based holidays and traditions without accepting the supernatural aspects. It doesn't make the community that's built any less coherent. Does anybody, actually I should ask this, does anybody celebrate a holiday that you know nobody else in your circle celebrates? Kwanzaa, something like that. Kwanzaa, Ash Wednesday. Nobody celebrates that?
My ancestors are Swedish, so we celebrate Midsummer. Celebrate. It's a pagan holiday. It's and even a lot of the Christmas traditions are kind of tied to the winter solstice, that everybody sees. But that's it's fun in Iowa. The lights coming, that's the glory of the cosmos.
Right. See, you get it. You got it. Yeah. Anybody else?
Growing up, my family would celebrate Dutch Santa Claus, which is vaguely Christmas related, but it happens at the beginning of December, and it's about the jolly old man who comes by with his horses that eat your carrots.
The carrots thing, that's right. Did they put it on the shoes?
Wooden shoes on the front porch.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting, right?
Yeah.
But see, when I say Christmas though, you think of like as a cultural icon, you know what I mean, right? Even though that was something we did. That's what I'm talking about. We don't need the supernatural things. The reason for the season doesn't have to be Jesus. You still enjoy the season, right? So this is something I like to talk about here. This takes a little bit of thinking about. It's called the human equation. So let's say we found out a way to build our perfect world, to have all traditions, and it was this big, long equation on chalkboard, right? And then you want to insert your particular faith understanding, your God. If you were going to describe your God in an equation, what would you use? What simple number or term would you use in an equation in something like this? If you had some kind of equation to figure out. Can you think of anything?
A lot of faith traditions have an infinite God, so an infinite symbol would probably cover a lot.
That's right, yeah. That's usually the answer I get. It's either the infinity symbol or zero. And not zero because God is zero, but because God usually exists outside of space and outside of time. And what do we call things that exist outside of space and time? No thing.
Not measurable.
Not measurable, so zero. So if you're doing this equation, you're humming along, typing away, you know you shouldn't multiply by zero. You certainly should not be divided by zero, right? Because that just blows the whole thing up. You can add zero, right? Or you can subtract zero. But does that change the equation? No, it doesn't. So if we figure out, to your light switch analogy, I guess it's hers, and we have an outlet of our equation to figure out how to do the light and the electricity, you start adding a bunch of zeros in there. The equation's still going to work because it's not the zero that makes the light turn. It's the energy and electricity and all that stuff. So we keep pushing that zero further and further and further out. Does adding anything change anything? The answer is no. But if you were to multiply it, or start with it, or insert it in any other way than adding it, it breaks it. Having that God belief can, not doesn't always, can stop us from making those equations work. It stops us from making that better world if we're using John Rawls's veil of ignorance. This is the famous quote from He was advising Napoleon, and he had come up with the, is it called an orarium, where the planets go around the sun. It's like a mechanical device. You might have seen it on like TV and shows. He had designed it, and Napoleon's like, this is cool, but like, where's God in this? Like, how is this going to work? And he responded, I have no need for that hypothesis. It works without God. This was revolutionary at the time. You know, having a worldview without God and showing it. That was revolutionary at the time, and that's what I'm trying to communicate to you here. That God isn't needed. You can insert it. Nobody should take it away from you. But for us, it doesn't necessarily add anything. This is the bridge that secularism builds. It allows us to recognize that and not stop or slow it down, not take anything away from anybody else. So here is the question, and I do want answers. What is the one unique thing the United States brought to the world? What's the one unique thing?
Like the great melting.
What's it?
Like a bunch of different cultures came together. It's like the great melting.
That's true. America did do that, but I think Rome probably did that too.
Government not tied to an ideology.
They had an ideology, I would say. But I think you're noodling on the edges. Most people don't think about this. It's secular governance. No other constitution had existed in the modern to semi-modern time that was based on secular governance. The power is derived from the people, not from God, not from gods, not from a God-appointed emperor or king, not from a divine right of your nation to exist, but from the will of the people. Even the French didn't do this until after the United States did. That is what is so unique about the United States. That's why we're able to have this conversation, because the power of our government comes from the people, not from God. By necessity, if we're going to have those bridges built, the government can't be picking a side, ought not be picking a side. Not, oh, this is, that's here. It is not because atheists don't think religion should exist. It's because it's the only way to ensure that they can all coexist. Because you can have this conversation in Iran, right, or Saudi Arabia. If we did, it would be like a special issue, right? you're not necessarily safe to do it. In the United States, you will. This is really what it comes down to for secularists. We all need the same things. We all want to be safe. Nobody wants to be hungry. Nobody wants to be thirsty. Nobody wants to be alone. Nobody wants to be torn down all the time. Even our worst enemies that we don't like, we know that if they don't get food for 3 days, they're going to be hungry, right? We recognize that humanity in every single one of us, regardless of where we're from, regardless of what we look like, or how we were raised. This is really the key. If we recognize this in every single human being, faith claims just don't, that they're the hat they wear on top of this pyramid, right? These are true for everybody and have been for everybody at all times, all for humanity. So, we're going to get some of the ceremony off the arms of the angels, images here to really cover this home. These are some secular organizations and just images of what people do without the need for faith. These are real benefits in the real world and have real impact. And they are measured not in how strong their faith is, they're not measured in how long their church has been around, how many scandals they've avoided, or whatever. It's because their hands are doing the work. If we had charities that came out and said, hey, we believe that everybody, we have millions of dollars, millions of pounds of food here, and we believe everybody should have some food, but they didn't hand it out, would we think that's a charity? No, it's the actually giving the food to people is what makes us consider them to be good charities. So these are all secular things. This guy was picked. This is Norman Borlaug. It's because the presentation is going to be in the building named after him. And real quick, everybody should know who Norman Borlaug is. Who doesn't know? You do? Okay. Okay. Norman Borlaug was he was an Iowa boy. He went to high school, college, and back in I forget the actual year, but there was a problem with crops not keeping pace with the population growth. And we could farm, but we don't keep farming more and more land to the point where we live in time, especially in places like Africa and Indians. Norman Borlaug hit the books. He went to study agronomy and plants and speciation and hit genetics. And he found out how to make a lot of the crops that we grow today. And the reason that we get so much yield from them is because of the work of Norman Borlaug. He is considered the man who fed the world. Because without Norman Borlaug, we wouldn't have a lot of crops and hybrids that we have today, and we would be farming every square inch of it, rather than just urban. And then I guess there's our great barrier reef. This is our only planet. And then we have Jonas Salk. Who knows what he's like? Okay, do you guys don't know who Jonas Salk is? Okay.
He's the polio vaccine dude?
Yeah, and the polio vaccine. Yeah. How many people know somebody with polio? Exactly. Right. It's because of him. And the thing with Jonas Salk, what his big claim to fame is, do you know how much money he made off of the polio vaccine? He gave it away. He literally figured it out, gave it away. Because he saw how much harm it was doing to innocent children. Because it mainly impacted children. In FDR, he was in the wheelchair. Why was he in the wheelchair? Because he had polio as a child. Jonas Salk worked with other scientists to figure that out, and he gave it away. Yes, and then prison. I told you, I should play the music over. So, this is why I think secularism is going to be the best path of peacemaking. We don't want the divine right kings. We don't want emperors crowned by, at that time, the Pope, that's Charlemagne. That is not how we make a society better for everybody. Because in these examples, if you cross the king, you're done, right? You cross the empire, they have something you want, you're done. No. I believe that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. This is taken from the Human Rights Museum in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. I'm very proud to have gone there. It's an amazing place if you ever randomly find yourself in Winnipeg. But it's a really cool place. It's free to get in, and they have really good historiography of a bunch of human rights and civil rights leaders, both in the United States, Canada, and around the world. They have a whole Nelson Mandela thing, so I'm a big fan of that. Peaceful transfers of power, right? Those generally don't happen in kingdoms or empires. Maybe their kid gets in, but maybe they get killed, and then you have trouble. Secular government sets up a structure and framework for a peaceful transfer of power. Even religious organizations use this. They don't necessarily all pray on it. They'll vote. They'll seek out who wants to take the role, and they lay out the rights and responsibilities of the leader of that church, and then they fulfill it, rather than somebody kicking in the door and saying, "Oh, I'm the head honcho now." Even at the church, I don't believe they do that. They still have input from people that hold an office rather than a quasi-divine person who's unquestioned. Even they don't do that, right? Even the Catholics don't do that with the Pope, although they never use the power to bring in the Pope. You get the idea. And then the United Nations, right? Lasting peace has only really been possible in the modern world. Not because some ideology is necessarily correct, but because we base our ideologies and what our countries do on secular grounds, right? It's not, if you're a faith-based country, it's not that you can't join the United Nations. It's not that you can't do things. But if you do secular things, measurable things, good or bad, that's what gets you in, out. That's how we have peace. If we value the humanity of others first, we are better able to find consensus and common good. We can leave behind the traditions that don't help us improve our lives and embrace the ones that do. That's this. My country is the world, and my religion is to do good. Thomas Paine, Founding Father of the United States. Any questions? Any questions?
I have a question about the slide with Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Look at that.
So I know that it tends to fall apart in practice, but on paper, aren't a lot of religions also promoting these things as well, in theory?
Yes, that's why I included the Hitchens quote, because he's right. Religion is the first attempt at something like this. No religion or group, for that matter, I don't think would even survive or we would know about them if they didn't in some way understand this. He's actually famous for saying, do you think that tribe would have ever reached the base of Mount Sinai if they thought murder was good? If they thought kids shouldn't have food? No, they would die out a long time. Morality and the idea of humanism and taking care of your neighbor far predates any religious claim, because that's what made us live on earth and invent. Any other questions? Where do you want?
I'm thinking.
I mean, I guess expand on that, it sounds like you're saying that a religious belief could kind of facilitate this in the same way, so why not just go with it if it works the same way? Is that maybe where you're going?
Not quite.
Okay. But I think it's true that religions do and have done good. As atheists, I just think their fundamental claims are just not true.